The meeting will now come to order. Would you please call the roll? Oh, no? Let's start with a Pledge of Allegiance. John, would you do the honors, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now the roll.
Commissioner Pont?
Here.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Vice Chair Knudsen?
I'm here.
Chair Hardy?
Here. This is a time for public forum. This is a time when members of the public may come speak to us on anything that is not on the agenda. Because of the rules of the Brown Act, the Commission may not respond to comments on anything not on the agenda, but members of the public are welcome to so speak. Is there anyone who'd like to address us during the public forum? Seeing none, we'll move on. The next item on the agenda are the consent items. Members of the Commission or the public may ask that any items be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment.
I would like to pull 4.3.
Okay, we'll pull 4.3 at the request of Commissioner Manette. Any other items? That,
Staff would like to pull item 4.4 and continue it to a date uncertain.
Okay, we'll pull item 4.4 then.
Chairman Hardy, could we pull 4.1 as I guess I could see, just to separate because I wasn't here for that meeting. And I'm curious if there's public comment on item 4.2.
Well, let's pull 4.1, and I'll ask the public then if there is anyone here to speak on item 4.2 if it is pulled. You wish to pull this item from the consent agenda?
I'm not sure what that means.
What that means is you don't want to pull it. But if it is pulled, you'll get a chance to speak. You can trust me on that one. I think that leaves us with item 4.2 on the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion?
Move the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
Would you take the vote, please?
Commissioner Pont?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Vice Chair Knudsen?
Yes.
Chair Hardy?
Yes. That's it, you're done. It was that easy. It isn't always. So then we should go to 4.1. Commissioner Knudsen, did you pull that just so that we could vote and you could register your abstention?
Correct.
Okay. Are there any comments on the minutes of July 17th? Do we have a motion?
I'm so moved. I move to accept the minutes.
Second.
Ms. Gamero?
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Pont?
Yes.
Vice Chair Knudsen?
Abstain.
Chair Hardy?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to item 4.3, request by Don Gallagher for adoption of a resolution granting a design review exemption in order to construct 2 storage sheds near an existing agricultural barn located at 1859 Hillview Place in the 20-acre agriculture district.
Before we do anything on this, I want to disclose that I briefly met with the people who were speaking against this at the city council meeting, after the city council meeting, about process, and I exchanged some emails with one of those people about process.
Very good. Are there any other ex parte meetings to disclose? May we have the staff report, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Hardy. Just as a little background, staff became aware of the 2 unpermitted accessory structures on the property and subsequently met with the property owner to let them know that the structures require both planning approval and a building permit. As a result, the property owner has submitted for a design review exemption in order to retroactively legitimize 2 previously constructed storage sheds, which did not have the benefit of a permit prior to their construction. The 2 storage sheds are located in the center of the 5-acre property and are largely surrounded by existing vineyards. The sheds are constructed of a variety of materials, including wood and stone siding and corrugated metal roofing. In keeping with the design theme of a barn, the larger of the 2 sheds is approximately 150 square feet and 12 feet tall, while the smaller of the 2 sheds is approximately 121 square feet and 11 feet 8 inches tall. Staff has been made aware of a question regarding the amount of the site that has been removed from agricultural use. I'm not aware of what that square footage exactly is. However, a majority of the driveway is exempt from that provision that is taken out. So 16 feet up to 2/3 of the driveway don't count against that 1 acre maximum. In addition to that, the site plan provided by the applicant and in the packet inaccurately shows the amount of planted vineyard. You can kind of tell from the aerial on page 44 of your agenda packet. You can see a square kind of in that hexagon, if you will, that is planted vineyard. So my guess would be that it's quite under the 1 acre. Perhaps the applicant can provide a more accurate number to that. So staff does find the proposed accessory structures raise no substantial design problems and therefore recommend that the Planning Commission determine that the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to Section 15303. And approve a resolution finding that the project is exempt from design review, thereby approving the retroactive construction of the 2 storage sheds on the property located at 1859 Hillview Place. I am available to answer any questions you may have. The applicant is here as well.
I believe it is our new procedure to have the applicant or applicant's representative speak before the commission directs questions to staff, so I'd like to invite the applicant or applicant's representative to speak to the project at this time, please.
I really don't have anything to say.
Please come to the microphone. You don't need to say anything if you don't wish.
Okay, that's fine. I really don't have anything else to say right at this moment. So I'd be happy to address any concerns or issues that may...
Do you know what the spacing in the vineyard is?
Yes, I do. 3.5. It's 42 by 54.
.42 inches by 54 inches?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions for the applicant?
What does 3.5 mean?
42 inches. 3.5 feet.
Feet, okay.
I do have one of the applicant. Staff brought up the 1 acre coverage in the A20 zone. Can you tell us how much of this is not in agriculture?
No, not for sure. I am confident it's under 1 acre.
Is that wouldn't just include the buildings? It would include the space around the buildings.
Exactly.
You know, any parking you have personally, any recreational space, all of that would be included in the acre.
Exactly.
So I'm having trouble saying yes or no, looking at this aerial, given the apparent size of the cleared space.
I didn't know it was going to be an issue, or else I would have been happy to measure that out.
Okay, I'm just wondering if we can or should ask, not knowing the answer to the question.
Well, I think we can take that up when we deliberate. The spacing would enable one to calculate the area in vines based on the plan that's submitted, which looks like an irrigation plan. It gives the vine count for each of the blocks, but I don't intend to do the arithmetic now. I think that's a question myself that we can take up independent of the application before us. Are there any other questions for the applicant?
I do, but I was going to do it during our discussion. I guess this is a design review, but since there's been some controversy about what's gone on, and there's been some history, and especially in view of the letter that we received late from Ms. Wilson, I am just curious what the use is going to be of these buildings.
Now they're just auxiliary storage buildings.
Is that right? But you have any other plans for the use, or are there any other, what's...
No.
So these are just storage buildings,
Yes.
and there are no other structures on the...
Well, there's an existing barn, if you will.
Okay, so that's where the
barn.
events have been, in that structure?
Excuse me?
Is that where the wine tasting and events have been, in that structure?
I've had weddings out there, but
okay.
yes.
Okay, so that's where the events have been. All right, not in the sheds.
Oh, no.
Okay, but the sheds are maybe store stuff for that purpose?
No.
Okay.
That's been terminated over a year ago.
Okay, I hear you. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so
other than my son getting married out there.
So what I'm hearing is that there is stuff in the storage. There's storage only in these structures.
Yes.
And that they are not related to events or anything that happens in them.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Okay.
We can go on then to questions for staff.
I have a question for the staff. I'm a little confused about what Commissioner Monette mentioned earlier, that this was earlier in front of the council. Can you elucidate us, Director Hausch? Thanks.
So separate from the design review for the sheds, the City Council requested staff present a information item regarding a fence that was constructed between this property and an adjacent property. That presentation was made last Tuesday to the City Council and is completely separate from the design review exemption before the Commission regarding the storage buildings.
Thank you.
I have two questions of staff, if you will. How did staff become aware that there were two illegal buildings? That's the first question.
Staff received a code enforcement complaint identifying that there was potentially unpermitted structures and activities occurring on the property.
Okay. Second question circulates around any penalties the applicant may have suffered due to the sort of I'll build it and make the application later sort of activity.
So the City Council has authorized any structures that are legitimized through a code enforcement effort. The fees are doubled on those applications, and they are required to be built to the current building code in place at the time of the legalization. So these structures, if approved by the Planning Commission for a design review exemption, will be required to submit for a building permit, and the building permit fees will be doubled on those applications.
Thank you.
And anything that's substandard to current building code would have to be upgraded. Okay, thank you.
Director Hausch, when were these buildings constructed?
Staff is not aware of the exact timing of the building construction. The applicant can provide that information. We were made aware, or the concern over the unpermitted use and construction was provided over a year ago, and so we were made aware of them at that time, but we are not aware of exactly when they were built.
I don't need to know right now, but I may ask the applicant later.
Are there any other questions for staff? Hearing none, I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? Please come forward to the microphone and identify yourself.
My name is Joy Rhodes Brown. I live at 1815 Hillview. This report and request for design review exemption is flawed and quite frankly disappointing. There are misrepresentations of truth in these pages and also glaring holes and inaccuracies. If I were coming before you to explain the last 10 years I spent putting up buildings without permits, holding tastings without permits, and otherwise defying all vineyard rules, I would bring my best. I would present to the planning department my most transparent and up-to-the-minute drawings, photos, and documentation. Don Gallagher, however, clearly doesn't believe you're entitled to that information. Will his wink, nod, and sleight of hand distract you from what he doesn't want you to see? I ask you to bring your attention to a page in the packet entitled, well, nothing. What is this? Whose is it? Where is the property perimeter? What is the scale on this drawing? Can you read it? Diagonals indicate road direction. Trespass Vineyard just replanted about 25% in a new orientation, plus the entire back section of vines is missing. Why submit an old version when a current one is readily available? This version is misleading and false. Turning attention to the cluster of buildings, you find barn and storage sheds 1 and 2. Please note there is an attachment onto the back of the barn. It is building number 3 and is without plans. It was separate from the barn, roofed differently, but is now attached. Whereas the original set of plans so that you can see that before and after. The approval, 2011-59, is for an 800 square foot ag barn, not a 920 square foot ag barn. Aaron's report under zoning states that pursuant to Chapter 17.164, exterior revisions of any existing structures or buildings for both permitted and conditional uses shall require design review in the A20 district. This ag barn has been revised. 120 square feet have been added and the roof re-engineered, and of course without permit or design review. This drawing shows only a water tank. The enormous propane tank on the parcel is missing. Why is it not indicated? Is it perhaps so that you have no thoughts that the ag barn is actually Donnie's hospitality man cave, as he calls it? Where is the bocce court or the various patios? Where is the awful porta potty complained about in their years of Yelp reviews? Exactly how much of this property has been removed from ag? Take a look at number 2. Does it look suspiciously like it might be intended for a bathroom? That's because it is, plumbed and ready. The water section of Aaron's report states that the proposed storage sheds do not have plumbing and are therefore not new development. Yes, they do. If it is hidden beneath the drywall, find it. They installed a septic system behind the bathroom.
Mary, you need to pass things out through staff.
If it has been taken out, insist trespass acknowledge that it was their intention to have a bathroom. Are there other reasons for plumbing and septic? Why does this report not include this information so you know how your applicant runs his business? On the far right of this drawing, it says gate. What an understatement. Is this in the Vineyard Road or the street? The City of St. Helena project analysis for a building permit in 1992 states that there is a 12-foot easement in the Vineyard Road and that construction is prohibited. These stone pillars, rock walls, and iron gate are all sitting on the easement. As trespass next-door neighbor, I am exhausted and I am disgusted by the continuing code abuses and their assault on our neighborhood. We have had more than enough construction, cars, limos, buses, and hospitality events on our dead-end street. Donnie is thumbing his nose at you by not providing accurate, current, or even remotely honest or trustworthy information. As part of his hospitality monologue, Donnie likes to say the parcel was named for the neighbors walking their dogs and strolling through. Perhaps a more real explanation is that Donnie believes it is prerogative to trespass against the community. Well, his is not the Lord's Prayer, and you do not have to forgive those who trespass against us. This design review exemption should be denied. This is a fraudulent misrepresentation by Don Gallagher. Pertinent and important facts have been left out of this report for your consideration. If St. Helena is serious about enforcing its codes and regulations and preventing future abuses, more severe consequences must be handed down following deceitful and predatory activities. Send a message strong enough that it hurts the abuser so that he stops hurting our community. Maya Angelou said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time."
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Please come to the microphone. Identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Barry Brown, and I have lived at 1815 Hillview for the past 35 years. I'm intrigued but confused by the phrase Design Review Exemption. Is this a new code for trying to slip under the radar and get away with something? If the purpose of this hearing is to allow trespass to avoid scrutiny of already constructed but unpermitted buildings and continue their catch-us-if-you-can business model of trespass, then it is. My objections to this application are many. They include traffic, water use, noise, and cumulative impact. But most importantly, the application fails to mention the Gallagher's history of code abuses. For instance, building number 2 was clearly designed to be a restroom and included a septic system. That's not mentioned in the report. This is such an egregious transgression that the Napa County Environmental Health Officer was required for a site inspection. The one permit on the trespass parcel is for an 800-square-foot agricultural barn. In the most recent packet of photos, which was downloaded from a public website 3 days ago, undeniably it is not in use as an ag barn, unless by ag barn one means hospitality center. Furthermore, it was never intended to be an ag barn. The city of St. Helena was deceived from the first set of plans. For more than 10 years, the Gallaghers have been hosting tastings, wine club events, wine sales on the property using a variety of outdoor amenities when the weather is good and the ag barn when it isn't. Over a year ago, the Gallaghers were told by the city to stop the tastings and remove the ag barn furniture, but they have not stopped. It is important to note these omissions because they are evidence of the Gallaghers' pattern and their continuing intent to deceive despite clear orders to do otherwise. One curious planning commission might even ask why this small parcel of 4 acres of vineyard and 800-square-foot ag barn, already supposedly in service to the vineyard, needs 3 more accessory structures in excess of 390 square feet. Clark Vineyard Management provides all the equipment and personnel as required to maintain the vineyard. What are the extra buildings really for? A second apropos point, the governments and regulatory bodies of the Napa Valley have recently come under much stern criticism for their lax attitudes towards wineries and properties that break the rules. Sins are forgiven, the rules bent, and expanded or rewritten to legalize the activities. There's 2 examples of that on the front page of the Register today. If you listen to your constituency, you'll hear that the people are fed up. The Gallaghers have repeatedly flaunted the rules, codes, and regulations of the city and county. Is their only punishment to date to sit through this hearing as if they were law-abiding citizens? It's not enough. Even doubling the permit fee is not enough. Without negative consequences, their misbehaviors will continue. Their MO indicates they will continue to abuse their available privileges at every opportunity. They have not earned our trust. Do not rubber stamp this application. Ask the questions, recognize the people for what they are, and please deny this application. To paraphrase John Stuart Mill, illegal behavior will continue if good people look on and do nothing. Will you do nothing? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Susan Mitchell. I live at 1743 Hillview Place. I've lived there over 20 years. Hillview and Scott are very small streets. We don't have sidewalks, and that's one of the pleasures of it. It's a very quiet neighborhood. I was a little disconcerted a couple years ago. My daughter and I were walking on our street. There was a limo driver that had pulled out of Trespass Vineyard and stopped to urinate in my neighbor's front yard, and we took his picture and we reported him and just thought, wow, is this the way our neighborhood is going? It was shocking. The loud parties are we had all our doors and windows closed, and I thought somebody was in my living room with the stereo on. It was outside coming from their vineyard. That's how loud it was that night. And I didn't know that kind of thing was permitted. Apparently, you can do things without permits here. But I was told today I have to get a permit to get a new window in my bedroom. So to see that there's been buildings built without permits, that is shocking to me as well. Thanks.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak at the public hearing?
Well, now I have something to say. What an attack, a vicious attack for just because of a fence. Now, we've been neighbors 22 years, and there's been never a complaint for that whole time until we have a fence. And now this fiction that they're portraying as truth it's sad. There was no septic system. Yes, one building was built as a bathroom. I was hoping to build it as a porta-potty type bathroom. There was a tank. It was since been removed. Water has been disconnected. That building is now a storage building. We built it undersized, unbeknownst to me, because a 10 by 10 building is undersized for no permits. But I faced it with rock, and that made it exceed the limit. Sorry, I'm a little bit upset at these lies here. I wish I could address everyone as they came up. Please, if there's anything else that I need to address. Oh, the 800 square foot barn is an 800 square foot barn. It was built with all the proper permits, and there was a pump house that we attached the barn to, if you will, and that was all done with permits, all through the city, all through proper channels. The pump house was a 10 by 10 pump house that was built without permits because it was permitted.
Does anyone on the commission have questions for the applicant?
What do you mean it was built without permits because it was permitted? Oh, it was built with a permit if it was permitted.
Well, we went to the planning department, told them what we had put a well in. We can build we told them where it was, and that's what the paper was that she was saying. We had to designate where the building was on the property, and that was the extent of it.
I see.
What he means, Commissioner Monette, is that buildings 100 square feet or less are exempt from the uniform building code requirement for building permits.
So it was okay to build it. It wasn't
Yes.
permitted, but it was
Yes.
okay. That's what you're saying.
It's permissible to build a building without a permit if it's 100 square feet or less.
120.
And you're saying there is no septic system?
There is not, never was.
Okay.
I have a question for you. When were these additional structures, when did you build them?
Okay, the number 2 was finished, not even finished, it's still not finished, because I stopped, nearly finished, June of 17.
And the other structure?
15, March of 15, I believe it was.
So 3 years ago,
Yes.
3.5 years ago. Go ahead.
These parties, my son got married out there. I don't know what she's talking about, the date, but we're permitted to have a party out there and music up until 10 o'clock at night.
Well, that's arguable, but I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying. I'm wondering, when was the last time that you used it as a tasting room?
A year ago.
You said you stopped doing that.
Yes.
Okay.
I do our tastings up at the winery.
You haven't done any there
No tastings.
for a year, is what you
Yes.
say. But you did have a personal friend have a party there for a week.
No, my son had his wedding.
Oh, okay. My bad. But, someone that was you just had a family
Yes.
event there within the last year.
Yes.
Okay. And that was
May.
it. And that was it.
That, as far as I know, within the last year.
Okay.
I have some further questions for staff, but none more for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
Oops, sorry. I never had a problem with the microphone over there. But this one is, you've had trouble with this microphone.
You can go back over there.
I hate that microphone.
This is why I'm here. Okay, no, that's okay. So just a couple questions. First of all, this was originally a consent item, and one, I'd be curious as to your thinking about that, Director Hausch, versus being, because it's after the fact. Is that typically a consent item, or usually is that?
We base the determination to put on the consent calendar based on the scale and scope of the project. The fact that it has to do with code enforcement, from our perspective, didn't sway the typical process. So a building of this size or these size proposed on a vineyard would have been consent under the standard procedure. The design review exemption is required often for buildings of this size, and that's a mechanism utilized often for buildings of this size, so staff just filed standard procedures.
That's great. I was just curious. And then the second question is, I know it's not part of this application, but I am, because it was brought up by the public, I'm curious about the easement, which defines the property on the far side, and the gate, which is on the easement. I presume that gate is not considered a building from the easement's perspective. Is that correct?
So staff has reviewed the easement and the fence construction extensively, including in the presentation to the City Council last week, and have concluded that it was legally constructed, and any disagreements regarding the construction of the fence or the placement of the fence are civil matters between adjacent property owners.
Including the gate itself? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so basically our matters here are merely the two outbuildings that were constructed, and I guess not the pump house extension to the barn. Is that correct?
That's accurate. So the barn was legally constructed, went through the design review process. It may have even been a design review exemption. I don't recall. Full design review, thank you. Full design review prior to, do you remember the year? 98? 2011. Applicant took that process, or the barn through the process, was approved for an agricultural barn. Staff then, again, received a complaint approximately a year ago regarding concerns over potential unpermitted structures and activities. We initiated the Napa County Environmental Health Department to go out there because there was concern over unpermitted septic. We have identified that no septic was installed. There was a tank that was utilized. It was essentially an RV tank, waste holding tank, utilized to serve this structure, which was functioning as a restroom. If the structures are permitted to move forward, demolition of the plumbing will be required because it's not permitted under the requested design review exemption. So all plumbing would have to be removed from those structures.
And a final question for you. What is there a definition in the code regarding what are the uses of an agricultural barn, or can you do any use of a barn that you've built?
So you can use it for agricultural activities related to your agricultural work on the site. The barn was not being utilized as it had been approved when we initiated the code enforcement case. It was, from staff's perspective, appeared to facilitate the unpermitted winery activities that were occurring on the site. Staff directed the applicant, notified them of the prohibition on how that building was being utilized, and will continue to monitor the site to ensure that they are in compliance. And I will just add, we have continued to monitor activities on this site and have found no evidence, either online or through actions occurring on the property, that the property is being used for any winery-related activities currently.
And so, as part of the retroactive approval, there would be a requirement to take out any existing plumbing lines. Would there also be a requirement to have the barn be used in its original permitted use? Is that part of it,
There's
potentially?
very specific elements requested from the applicant and conditioned when they approve the barn.
Thank you.
Was that one of them?
It's an agricultural barn. The approval listed a number of things.
And it does not include any winery or...
Oh, absolutely not. No, this is an agricultural site. It was never approved for any winery activities.
So what are the consequences if that were to start happening again?
It's a civil case.
It would depend on what specific activities occurred, the reaction of the applicant if we were to get involved. I mean, that's a very nebulous response because there's no specific element.
Well, is it not a use permit? I mean, that would be changing the use.
Well, a use permit would be required to do it legitimately, but it is not likely that it would be approved.
Yeah. Not in the A20.
Right, but if you found out that it was happening, is there anything that the city can do?
Again, it would depend on the scope and scale and response of the applicant when we notified them of the violation. There is not something as clear-cut as a double fee permit for a zoning code violation.
If I could, it's going to take me a little while to get there, so please bear with me. So what we have is a site that had some illegal use going on. They also put up a pair of illegal buildings. And there's some dispute about a fence and a gate. So we have a series of misadventures, to be kindly as possible, about what was done with that site. And city staff and the city council has worked on repairing some of these, on mitigating some of these, on essentially undoing some of these. So what we have here is just a small piece, if you will, of an entire pie. So what we have in front of us, if I can ask the question, is simply an action that the Planning Commission can and should do, either up or down, under our code that fits under this whole pie. So we have a very tiny slice, if you will, of the entire set of actions around this particular site and the violations therein, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, so we don't have ability to act on anything other than our little tiny pie slice here, which is these two buildings. Thank you.
I can address the easement and the gate if you'd like.
I don't think, speaking for myself, that we need to hear anything beyond what Chairman or Director House has presented.
But the gate was part of the design review for the barn. I just wanted to bring that forward.
Right. Well,
the initial, so it was approved.
My mission at this point will be to try to direct deliberations towards the agenda item and those facts that are relevant to what's before us.
Well, there were a lot of facts brought up that were irrelevant by the Browns, and they were...
I'm talking about our deliberations, not about the public comments. You've had two opportunities to address us.
Well, there was a question about that, so I thought if I could help.
The question was not directed to you. No one has directed further questions to you. This is a point at which, according to our updated procedures, I can and do wish to offer you the opportunity, if you wish, to request a continuance. This procedure is in place in part because with only 4 commissioners, a tie vote will be a negative determination, right? An approval will require a majority or 3 out of the 4 commissioners present. But other than that, I think that's the only question really I have for you.
There was a question?
The question is whether you wish to request a continuance.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Well, thank you. Then I will close the public hearing and proceed to commission deliberations. Commissioner Monette, would you like to begin? You don't need to.
Okay.
You can pass. Well, Commissioner Knudsen.
I'm bothered by when members of our community don't permit activity before, meaning building activity, because we're the planning commission. That's what we're here for, in the building and planning departments. I'm disappointed when they're not done by the rules that apply to all of us. The only question in my mind is whether we punitively say to you, we wouldn't have approved this in the first place, and please tear down those 2 buildings, or say, well, they're there, and normally we'd approve them, and let's approve them. I'm just sorry that back in 2015 that we didn't have the opportunity, or the planning commission or the planning director at that time didn't have a chance to review the plans and work with you at the time. I think, I encourage, if anyone's watching at home, I encourage everyone to follow the procedures that we have in place in our town. If we have a level playing field, we're all much the better for it.
I hear both perspectives, but I think that we should continue this until staff has a chance to check out more fully some of the things that were said by the public. I notice, and I guess there's nothing in the Roberts rules that addresses this either, that the applicant gets time to rebut, but the public doesn't, and so I think that is an omission that could be overcome if we continue this until they could have an opportunity to say more about what their perspective is to the staff. So that's just all I can think of right now. Because I don't know. It's, one person says, yeah, he says that, she says that, that kind of thing.
Commissioner Pont.
I am not happy about how this came to us. If the applicant had applied for a pair of storage buildings, it would have rightfully been on consent. It probably would have passed on consent. You would have had a building permit and done it. What we have in front of us, once again, our little tiny slice of the pie that the Planning Commission can actually act on, is design review on these 2 buildings. We can't act on any disagreements about the fences, any disagreements about what the property was used for, nothing else. We can act on these 2 buildings, and that's it. I'm not happy about how it was done. I am really displeased with the applicant thinking they could get away with renting a place of business that wasn't permitted. But once again, those would be civil charges coming to the court as a suit by the city against the landowner. A very expensive, time-consuming, and ugly process that often results in a financial loss for the city of large amounts of dollars. So, given the restrictions in the permits now that I see in front of me, not to use them for anything but storage, to tear out all the plumbing, to essentially return these to what they should have been in the first place, was a pair of smallish storage buildings. I have some concern based on past behavior that future behavior will be fully compliant with what's supposed to happen. But once again, we got a small piece of the pie.
Can I have a question? I have a question, a point of order question. Is it appropriate? I mean, we are supposed to just look at that piece of pie, but can we can we consider the process that happened here as part of our decision? Is that because there are process questions that have been coming up?
Well, it looks like Director House would like to comment on
The
that.
basis for the decision on design review are the criteria for design review identified in the zoning code.
But if the process has been questioned, can we?
You can't assume that, can't assume anything regarding how these buildings may be used in the future or how the property may be used in the future based on what occurred in the past, given that we have stopped that activity and there has been no recent evidence that it has occurred. Staff has asked everyone who's contacted us regarding this to please provide any information regarding any ongoing unpermitted uses of the property. None has been provided. Staff has continually researched on the internet to try to find any recent posts or comments or any other evidence that would indicate unpermitted activities occurring on the site. None has shown up since we've initiated code enforcement, and we've also utilized other code enforcement research methods to try to engage the property owner to see if they would continue to do so, and we have been unsuccessful in getting them to continue any unpermitted uses of the site. So the property owner is well aware that they are not permitted to use this site for anything but agriculture, and that these structures are only to be used for agriculturally related activities.
I still have some concern about the expressed concern of the applicant for the well-being of the neighbors in terms of, it's nothing to do with the piece of pie, but in terms of the complaints about the amplified music and that sort of thing. That's a concern of mine too, going forward, that I didn't hear that there's a real concern for the neighbors.
The decision is based on the criteria of design review.
Well, it's always, I think, difficult to address code enforcement related application when the decision in front of us is one discrete piece, and there is much discussion and some perhaps controversy over the larger context of conduct. Some of the issues raised included past violations, allegations of other violations, and then some other conduct that might be unneighborly or worse, but is not necessarily a code violation of any sort. I think myself that it's actually quite important for us most of the time, perhaps not all of the time, to leave personalities out of the decisions before us. That's a hard thing to do. Often we live in a small community. We often know or know of the applicants in front of us and the neighbors who come to speak. But the property could sell tomorrow. The approval that we grant or deny has, certainly if approved, a long life in theory. It's good in perpetuity. So I think we make our best decisions when we focus on what it is we're approving and not who the applicant is. In a different sort of code enforcement context involving zoning violations, use matters, then history of use and concerns about future violations, I think, would be much more relevant than they are here in this design review setting, where I'm satisfied that the approvals before us are appropriately conditioned. I'm also going to offer the observation that these are probably far from the only accessory structures in town that were built without a permit. It's the smallest things where the details tend to be ignored permit-wise, but I don't say that to trivialize it. Simply, I think it's useful to recognize that code violations are not necessarily rare or unique events in this community or any other. And code enforcement, whereas in St. Helena and most communities in this part of California where it's primarily complaint-driven, we don't have staff driving around looking for violations. There are communities elsewhere in California that do. We don't. I don't know of any community nearby that does. Then you find out about things only when a complaint comes up. So there's limited enforcement in that regard. That's a policy decision. I think by and large that tends to work pretty well. Sometimes not so much. So, that's my overview here. Obviously there's a very poor relationship amongst the property owners who've spoken. That's not a problem that will be resolved tonight, if ever. These things tend to take on a life of their own in that regard. But I'm going to believe, because I think it's fairly well evident at this point, that one of the consequences of that kind of deterioration in neighbor relations is a lot of scrutiny. And that does tend to have some effect on the propensity to ignore the rules, if indeed there were one. I'm not really wishing to look at this for the moment as anything other than a design review matter, and I think on that basis, however unpleasant the context, it can and should be approved. So that's my perspective. Of course.
More. I'm hearing what you're saying. I appreciate what you've said. Is there no one else here that is troubled by the unresolved conflicting testimony on items that actually would make it not exempt from a design review? I mean, there was some talk about that, and I don't feel that that's been resolved. Is anyone else uncomfortable with voting on this without further inquiry from the staff on some of the conflicting?
What is it you think would, if true, make it impossible to approve these buildings under design review?
Well, and I suppose it was somewhat explained, but if the extra pump house was really an additional building, I can't remember the language, then it would not be, then it would be something that would need a design review.
But
and that's
not in this application. So I'm not sure why you think we couldn't approve what's in front of us simply because there's possibly another violation on the property.
Well, because if that were true, then it couldn't be exempt. If the accusation is accurate, then that's what I was inferring from what was said. Perhaps I don't understand it enough. But I just feel like there's not enough known. I think
Bobby,
that no one else agrees with me.
I talked about a pie because I think that's what we're facing. There's a whole mishmash of things involved with this property, many of which has been addressed in another forum that we don't have the authority to address. I mean, what we got before us is two buildings that were in violation, that this design review and the resolution that go along with it would change them back into what they should have been, which is two storage buildings with no water access at all.
Right,
all the other things are not in front of us, are not part of this, and regardless of how regrettable they are, I know, particularly that ongoing dispute with the neighbors, we can't fix and don't have the authority to address.
Right, but if what they were before isn't what they are now, if there were additions, I hear what you say. Also, if there is a septic system there, I mean, one person says yes, one person says no, would that make a difference?
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Could I direct one of your questions sort of over to Director Hausch?
Please.
Should the pump house have been part of this retroactive approval of existing structures or not?
Not from the perspective of staff. We did a full evaluation of all structures on the sites, all uses on the sites, and the elements of the structures that needed to be legitimized were these two structures that were built without the benefit of a permit. There is no septic system on the site.
Oh.
Absolutely confirmed. Napa County Environmental Health Department has confirmed that. City staff has confirmed that. There is no septic system on the site.
This is sad. I'm sad for our town. I'm sad about the dispute. I'm sad about the lack of neighborliness. I'm sad that it's escalated. On the other hand, I think we should approve the retroactive application with the constraints that the planning department has so carefully added to the use of the buildings.
I do have one comment to add. It's somewhere between a suggestion and a request, I suppose. Director Hausch, would it be possible for us to agendize as a scheduled matter a presentation from staff on the city's code enforcement policy and process? I think we could all benefit from clearer and firmer grasp of what the rules of the road are.
It'll only take 2 minutes.
Absolutely. That's an excellent suggestion.
Thank you. I'd like to see that, at the first opportunity. I know we're going to have some crowded agendas, but hopefully there'll be some that are not so crowded. And I do want to emphasize, I've spent a lot of time over the last 25 years dealing directly with neighbor disputes. I have a lot of appreciation for how difficult they can be, how unpleasant and painful. But it's from that experience that I've come to appreciate how little third parties can do about the relationship. We get a particular subject in front of us, an action we can take or not take. We have limited tools with which to influence anyone's behavior, largely in the negative. We can, as a city, take occasionally very strong action in response to code violations, but the general practice, I think, for very good reason, has been, and I expect it will continue to be, to encourage property owners to correct those violations that can be corrected with an application and a permit, to move forward and do so. I think, however unsatisfying that may be for neighbors, I think in the larger scheme of things that is a sound policy for the city. So, having said all that, is there a motion?
I'd like to move approval of the consent item to retroactively approve the 2 outbuildings with the constraints as elucidated by the planning director.
Is there a second? I will second the motion. Would you take the vote, please?
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
I am going to abstain.
Commissioner Pont,
A reluctant, but yes.
We will move on then to, are we at item 4.4? I'm a little bit lost, I'll confess. 4.4, which was,
That was continued.
To a date uncertain.
okay, do we need an action to continue it?
No.
Not if it's a date uncertain.
That's correct.
Okay, so
Is it possible to ask a question on it? On the reason for the continuance request?
Last-minute redesigns.
Thank you.
there's been a request for a break, so I'm going to call a 5-minute break. We'll resume in 5 minutes. I'll bring the meeting back to order so that we can resume with item 5.1.
Chair Hardy, Commissioners, and members of the public, 5.1 is also continued, however, to a date certain, and this will be September 18th at the request of the applicants. So we will need a vote, motion and a vote to continue to September 18th.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Gamero, would you take the roll, please?
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Hardy.
Yes. Moving right along then. 5.2 is a report and public hearing on consideration and recommendation to the City Council of an ordinance amending St. Helena Municipal Code, Title 17, Section 17.148, signs, as we deem appropriate. Is there a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hardy. I will try and keep this brief as this item has been before the Commission before. So City staff, the Planning Commission, the City Council, and project applicants regularly find challenges with the existing zoning code, including incomplete requirements, antiquated policies, and a general lack of consistent regulations. On August 22nd, 2017, the City Council and Planning Commission prioritized an update of the zoning code as a top priority to both address these ongoing issues. In October 2017, the Council prioritized preparing recommended updates to the sign ordinance by June 30th, 2018. The current sign code has two processes, an administrative sign permit and a Planning Commission sign permit, both of which have prescriptive standards for the number, size, and location of commercial signage. Staff finds the prescriptive limitations in place would allow sign permit applications which clearly meet these criteria to be reviewed at the staff level. Any requests for signs which fall outside those prescriptive limitations would then be elevated to Planning Commission for review. This change would make the sign permit process less cumbersome and more efficient for the public, staff, and the Commission, and therefore would both work to encourage compliance and more efficiently utilize staff resources. As such, staff is recommending an amendment to Municipal Code Section 17.148, which would allow signs within the prescriptive standards set forth within the section to be approved at the staff level. With sign permit requests falling outside those prescribed limitations, more or larger signs requiring Planning Commission approval. Staff has received some feedback regarding the definitions and exclusions listed in our update, and we will cross-reference prescriptive allowances and limitations to those definitions and exclusions in the report that goes before the City Council. At this time, staff is recommending that Planning Commission review the draft ordinance and propose text amendments to the signed ordinance and determine that the amendments are exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to guidelines section 15061 and recommend that the City Council approve the proposed ordinance in order to update and modify the existing zoning code governing signs, expanding the current allowances for administrative sign permits, and create and implement administrative sign permit fee. With that, staff would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions from the Commission?
I have a few. When you say you're going to make some further fixes, I did talk to staff about some. Those are what you're talking about.
That is correct.
Okay. For the edification of everyone, would you mind either reading those off or have me read them off?
I would happy to, but if you would like to, it would probably help staff to ensure we accurately reflect them, and would help the record from the direction of the Commission.
Okay. I went through this again compulsively, and I think the first one is on 151 of 188, the definition of primary frontage. If you notice, it's designated by the property owner. That's to be changed to be designated by planning staff. The roof sign definition, if you've got a pitched roof, the way it's written, the sign is illegal if it's stuck to the top of the ridge where two pitches come together, which means you could have a sign below the ridge, like painted on what appears to everyone standing outside the roof, and it would be a legal sign. So we're changing that to pretty much anywhere on the roof. So you can't paint "Eat at Joe's" on the pitch that faces the street and have that be a legal sign. Several of them on 152 of 188, which was exclusion or exempt signs, doesn't include any size restriction to those exempt signs. So they're going to tie it back to the size restrictions that we have in statute. For example, C under 17-148 2.0, not to pick on the city, but since the city is here, city signs, signs identifying the department's service or location of city facilities and operations, they could be any size they wanted to be. So we're tying some of these exclusion back to the size limitations that we had before.
What a great idea.
Yeah. Also tying those back to the location restrictions we have. So the city can't paint "Eat at City Hall" on top of their roof. Let's see.
Thank goodness for that catch.
On the next page, 17-148-030, signs located within the public right-of-way, including any sign or handbill attached to a utility pole or street sign pole, except those that are allowed to be so.
What do you mean? I mean, I was thinking lost animal signs. You can't put those.
Well, those are kind of illegal under this.
Yeah.
But, PG&E sticking a sign on their pole that's saying, "Watch out, we're going to replace this pole," all of a sudden would be changed from an illegal sign to a legal sign.
These are prohibited, though. That's prohibited.
Yeah, those are prohibited.
Yeah.
But we'd make it such that signs that are to go on the pole by either law or convention can go on the pole. As it is, it would be illegal for PG&E to come by and stick a sign on their own pole. Even those that say, hazard warning, that would be an illegal sign.
Well, would convention be posting for lost pets? Because
I don't think so. Those are still, any place I'm familiar with, those are all illegal, but people sort of blink and nod.
Well, essentially, they're temporary signs, is what they are.
Yeah,
unless they're not taken down.
Yeah, there's signs every weekend, advertising an estate sale or a garage sale, and guess what? They get taken down on Sunday after the sale's over, and there's no time to make a complaint, and nor should there be.
But we certainly don't want, PG&E sticking on a sign that says, hazard above, and a little block in the corner says PG&E, and somebody says, well, that's an advertising sign, it has to come down. No.
So what are you suggesting, that be changed? Or?
Yes, suggesting that wording be changed such that signs that should go up there can go up there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let's see.
Are they allowed in the code someplace specifically, or would this be?
Usually those are mandated by state law, so they supersede our rights, and Commissioner Ponce's recommendation is to identify that so that way there's no confusion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So somebody doesn't come in and say, oops. Okay. And those were about it, I think.
I had a couple. Is this the right time?
Please.
Okay, let's see. On page 155, 2A, it says, if I can read it so small, each business shall be permitted a total of 3 of the following types. Now, and I thought, does that mean 3 of each? So is that 9, or is that 1 of each? And then I see on the next page, under number 3, A, it kind of takes care of it. Administrative sign permit 2 of each of the following types. So depending if that was your meaning, 2 of each, maybe that should be put in there. If that's not your meaning, then it's just 3 total. It's just not clear the way it's written, if you understand what I'm wondering about. So is that 9 or 3? And if it's 9,
yeah, I understand what you're saying. So it's 3.
Oh, it is 3.
It's 3. So yeah, basically the intent is that you get an identification sign, maybe a wall sign, and then something on your door.
So you get all 3.
Correct.
Okay, as opposed to
Correct.
3, as opposed to 2 of each. Okay. All right. Thank you. It wasn't clear. I don't know if you want to change the.
Well, this might be
Each,
a point
all
where
3
little clarification would be a good thing down the road. So I'm just going to rehash this to make sure I understand it before I propose a change. The intent here is to allow up to 3 signs total, 1 each from each of the types. Is that right? 1 identification sign not to exceed 10 feet, or 1 projecting or non-projecting limited to 12 feet, etc.?
That's correct.
So you can't have 3 of one type.
Okay, I read it as
So
you could have
then
2
each
of one and 1
business
of the
shall
other.
be
Yeah.
permitted
I agree.
1 sign from each of the
Category.
following.
I think that would make more sense.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That would be a good change.
Up to, so it's clear. Yeah. You don't have to. Okay, let's see. Did I have it?
Then you could just say 1 sign from each, drawn from each subdivision below.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Just so long as it's 1 from each of those categories.
Yeah. And then I had another opinion. Ooh, go figure. Let's see, on page 158, the crossed out thing on 17.148.050, illumination at the top of that page. I mean, I was having a little discussion with Noah about this before the meeting, but I don't like crossing that out because it's a form. I mean, there are 2 things here. It's a form of advertising, so it's going to be advertising 24/7, whether it's there. And as Noah pointed out, yeah, we want to help our businesses. You know, we want to promote our businesses. On the other hand, I was thinking, St. Helena needs to sleep. She used to sleep, and I know people complain about how early she goes to sleep. But I don't like the idea of, just in terms of conservation, of burning lights when a business is not open. And I like the idea of businesses closing and we close down. We're closed down. It's a small town and we closed down. But anyway, those were my feelings about that. So I would like that to be left in. I have no idea what you guys might think.
I'd be interested in what Director Hausch's take on the illuminated when closed provision.
Yeah, staff is supportive of the change from the perspective of allowing a business to provide some advertising in an evening beyond when they may be open. But again, this is a staff recommended change. The commission does not have to support these. We will be bringing forward the recommendations along with the planning commission's input to the city council for final action.
Well, for example, I'm thinking of, when a bar closes, the sign still stands outside, Bush Beer closed or something like that, right? And that goes throughout the night. On the other hand, if you have the lights all on at a gas station, you think it's open, right? If it's not off, it's sort of light pollution. Have you given any thought to this, Commissioner Pont?
It's one I circled when I went through this. And I've got arguments both for and against. I mean, there's always the marketing argument. When we're trying to increase businesses' flexibility and ability to market within the city, having a sign on that says Jack's Jewelry, may draw some attention the next day. I mean, it's a small margin shot, but if you've ever dealt with folks that sell things for a living, any small margin shots worth taking. There's also the safety argument. I mean, the police will often tell you, leave some of your lights on in the interior of your shop. Okay, it could be an advertising sign, but nonetheless, that's a light on. On the other hand, there's the quiet, peaceful argument. There's the light pollution argument. So I'm I was sort of betwixt and between on this one either way.
How about a betwixt and between saying that the light should, interior lights are different from signage lights, right? But so signage lights perhaps could be on while the business is open, but turned off no later than 10 p.m.
Unless the business is open later.
Unless the business is open later than 10 p.m.
The last thing when I batted this around in my head is when somebody comes before this commission with a lit sign, one of the provisions that are in here is we have the ability to control the level of illumination, how bright the sign is. As long as we're able to do that and can control how bright the sign is, that limits the power draw, limits the level of light pollution. So we don't have somebody coming in with their 1 million candle power light.
It would never be approved.
Something that may help this discussion is the requirement that the Planning Commission approve all signs that are illuminated is remaining in the code. So there, just to your point, you will be able to see all proposed illumination, so you would be able to regulate the amount of light that is being proposed to be remained on.
Yes.
I like the Commissioner Monette's idea, though, that at some point the lights, these are signs, they're not interior lights. At some point they get turned off. I don't know.
I think I like your suggestion.
The other thing is I'm pretty sure that many, if not all, of the folks on Main Street will actually turn their lights off. I mean, it's also a green thing.
Yeah.
To turn your lights off.
Yeah.
We have. This is a fairly green-aware community. I'm pretty sure there will be business owners who will just turn them off, and if they don't, they will get some blowback from some members of the community. Please turn your lights off when your shop isn't open.
I think this is an opportunity for the city to take a green stand and, not leave it up to complaint-driven. Also, it could be argued that part of the charm of a small town is it's different than the city. In the city, the lights are on all night, and here you can take a walk after hours and it's dark downtown. I mean, maybe the businesses are shooting themselves in the feet somehow. If this town is going to be charming and people want to stay here, I think they want a small town feeling, and that's so nice when everything goes to sleep. So, anyway, that's just another perspective.
Just to further add to this discussion, it is not necessary that you come to unanimous perspectives. So in the bylaws identify that in situations where the commission is not unanimous in their recommendations, staff will communicate the feelings or the numbers from each. So if this situation, and we haven't heard from Chair Hardy on this, but there's a 2-2, then staff will communicate that to the City Council as an individual concern that they will then address.
I think there's a pretty focused effort. I don't know how much strength or support it has moving forward, but nevertheless, I'm quite certain there is a focused effort to encourage business owners and encourage the city to develop policies that will support more evening business activity on Main Street. There's no doubt about that in my mind, and I don't think I can't support simply restoring the red line. I do think it's appropriate to have a cutoff for businesses that aren't open. I'm fine with the cutoff idea. My own time, if I had to pick one, would be 11, not 10, but that's where I am.
And since we're thinking about this, I mean, a business might be closed, for example, a restaurant on Main Street, but there's still staff inside, they're cleaning up, they're doing things. It might take them a while to flip the switch. Seems like you should give them an hour or something, right? And so maybe it's like 11 or an hour of closing.
I like that flexibility.
I like that too.
Did you have any other comments, Bobby? Okay.
This is going to go to the city council. City council is going to be the people who really make this.
We don't get the last word on
Right, okay.
anything that has to do with an
So the
ordinance.
fact that the thing is dated September is because they're not going to get it until September. Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Move with the alterations?
Commissioner Knudsen, did you get your comments in? I'm losing track.
I don't have any further comments. Thank you for all your careful attention. The couple of things that I looked at were exactly as I was hoping. So, good job, guys.
I'm left with one. I'm looking at page 153, up near the top, what's now item N as in Nancy. I would suggest that this read, real estate signs less than 4 square feet in size on the property listed for sale or rent. Not perfect, but I think that's close enough. It should be fine.
Staff agrees with
Yeah,
that.
that reads much better than what's there. It's good.
That's my only additional comment.
There's another place in here, because I was taken there and I was thinking, what about the directional signs, the open house, but that's in another place. Is there a reason for it being in another place and not here? And I can't remember exactly where it is, but I remember,
because that
okay, so I
falls
crossed
under-
out my opinion.
It's 17.148.080 on page 158.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, right there.
It's broken out because it provides very specific or prescriptive limitations and allowances. So it rather than just
Okay.
give the
I got
simple element about it,
Or-
it gives very specific criteria how they are allowed.
Could you put a cross-reference there? It might be helpful for people reading it. A cross-reference on page 153 after that C, whatever it is here, for more details or whatever.
Good
Yeah.
suggestion.
Okay.
If there's no further discussion, do you require any more particular direction from us, Director?
There is a resolution to recommend, I believe.
Do we have?
So
And then
would
there's,
that
public
be a
comment?
recommendation with
The changes identified by
the changes identified? Okay.
So moved.
There's a public hearing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I will open the public hearing.
Quieter than us.
Hi, good evening. Deborah Doman. I work with Treasury Wine Estates. We own Behringer here in town, and I wanted to make a request that you consider an additional change to the sign ordinance. It's specifically in regard to banners. There's a definition of banners in there, but then it seems to be regulated under in 17.148.020 under temporary advertising signs or balloons, which it doesn't really match because a banner is never going to be less than 12 inches. But yet it's my understanding from personal experience with this that the banners are regulated under that section. So I think that there needs to be an additional tweaking of what banners are, what's allowed for banners, and I'd actually request that it be additional time, in some instances longer than 2 weeks, and definitely more than the regulated 8 weeks per year that you can do it.
Which letter are you looking at?
I'm looking under what the new L,
The new L.
17.148.020.
Yeah.
There's a
new L.
definition of banners separately, but staff regulates banners under this section.
I see what you're saying.
And it doesn't seem to match because a banner is never going to be 12 inches or less. So I'd like to see a separate regulatory addition about banners, and that it be longer than some of these temporary banners. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We do a music in the summer. We do music, and we do it, I think, for 10 weeks. So it'd be great to be able to have a banner up there advertising our live music for those 10 weeks. So you have the impacts. People are coming through town, and we'd like to see, people get off the highway that's driving through St. Helena and stop at Behringer. So we'd like to see it more than 4 times a year, or more than, is it 4 times? Yeah, more than 4 times. It would be a maximum of 8 weeks, and also a longer time than just a 2-week time.
So you want more than 4 times, a maximum of 8 weeks still, or 10 weeks?
I would like more than just 4 different signs per year, and also for longer than just 2 weeks. Not maybe in every instance, but in some instances where we're trying to promote our summer music. And I'm going to give you a little bit numbers of
How much are you asking for exactly?
Yeah.
Because if you're asking for 20 signs, 4 weeks a sign.
No, I would say I would not say 20 signs. I would say maybe six times per year, and also some flexibility for increasing the time for 2 weeks.
6 separate signs, or 6 times a year you would have?
6 different times a year would have a different sign.
And it would be one sign you're talking about, or several banners?
One sign.
One banner. So one banner 6 times a year.
Correct.
For some undefined number of weeks each time.
Correct. I would say a maximum 10 weeks. There's one we'd like to put up 10 weeks, and others we don't need up for that long. But I also want to give you little stats of how these affect our business. So when we had our 97-point wine banner up there, we would get 5 to 8 guests a day who said that they would come in because of those banners. And if you extrapolate that out, our average spend per guest is about $125.
Well, you can't just extrapolate out, don't you?
I don't understand.
That's not how it's done.
Well, it's an estimated cost to our business of about $360,000 annually,
Yeah,
and in sales tax to the city about $7,250.
But that's not how you can do that.
Well,
you can't.
That's how we as a business do that.
You can't just draw a straight line.
That's how we as a business do it.
Well, no, that's not how you do it.
I think my point is that not having the ability to have these banners up there extremely negatively affects our business. So I think the code is written poorly about banners, and I'd like to see more flexibility with them, and that's my request to you. Okay. And as I look at the recent study that the city commissioned about being more business friendly, and I think one of the recommendations was that you should do some PR and marketing to convince people that you're more business friendly, and I think I'm giving you an opportunity to show that you're actually more business friendly, and that's my request for your consideration, and I'll make the same request to the city council as well.
Can I ask a question of the public commenter?
Yes.
What size are your banners?
Ooh, I don't have that information, but I can get that to you.
They're big, I think.
Well, I think this is our last...
One was on our gate, so about the size of our gate.
Yeah, it'd be useful to know, because right now the banners only apply to ones that are essentially only a foot high, and yours clearly... Oh, am I not right?
It's
Planner Heacock?
It could be clear, but the 12-inch restriction is for balloon size. It doesn't apply to the banners.
What is
it's only
the
the balloons.
Yes, and that's my point. Is it's not clear.
Not there. Okay. Oh, okay.
Well, does anyone have experience with commercial banners and
Well, are you
what
talking about a
size they
banner
are?
across the road? No, a banner on your gate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This isn't a banner in downtown.
Right. Well, I
Although
just
there
didn't know what
are rules associated with those banners.
That's a separate situation.
Are they specified in the sign code? The separate situation? No.
I'm not sure. We will look into it prior to taking it to council. So the whole council process for getting the banner across.
They require discrete applications for each placement and approval by the city council. They don't even come to the planning commission.
And they're restricted to basically public service kinds of...
But also commercially oriented public service.
Yeah, 501c3s can put them up.
It'd be really interesting to know about commercial banner sizes, and the interesting thing about Behringer is it's got a very long street frontage, right? And so that would seem also to possibly have an input, compared to other businesses. If you wrapped a different business that only has a 10-foot frontage or a 20-foot frontage versus something that has 100 or 200 feet frontage, I don't know what the frontage is at Behringer, it's a whole different game. It's also, has historical fencing, and I mean, that's a whole. Without knowing more, it'd be hard to craft something.
In staff's experience, cities don't often regulate the size of temporary banner signs because to the point you're making, the structure upon which they're placed by its nature limits the size. And often because they're just used for temporary events, a grand opening or a sale, they're used on a limited basis. And so cities will regulate the kind of time, place, and manner, but not dictate the size traditionally.
But Director Hausch, the other fascinating thing is they are considered temporary signs, right?
Yes.
And that's the intent, is that they're temporary rather than, you can apply for a sign and put a permanent sign in and then change the lettering on the sign, presumably. Could you?
We don't allow changeable letter signs. Typically, there are limited instances where that's allowed, such as a church or a marquee for a theater, but typically those types of signs are not approved.
Interesting. But this is still the idea is that it's a temporary special deal.
Yeah, but 6 weeks, 6 times a year is not necessarily temporary.
It's not temporary. That's basically a permanent structure if it's over half
different
a year.
things. I mean, I know that it was not said that would be 6 times a year, 10 weeks, but that's what, if we're looking at that, that's more than half the year. I mean, it's more than, so, I'm not sure what kind of time limits or what drove the time, what kinds of considerations drove the time limits that are already in there. Do you know what that is?
Not having been involved in the prior process by which this code was drafted, staff is not aware. They're typically driven by seasonal holidays, seasonal events that each business may have.
No, I meant what standards were used to decide 8 weeks is enough for the year. I mean, where do you know what standards that?
It's usually, again, based on, cities will do calculations. Okay, there's this many holidays or this many events, or this seems to be an acceptable number. There's all types of metrics that are used.
I guess I'm wondering why there are any rules at all. Why couldn't they put it up at 52 weeks of the year?
Well, the idea is you don't want temporary clutter on your facade.
That's what I'm asking.
Think of
standard of temporary
if
clutter.
you remember at sort of Market Street of 40 years ago, and a whole series of businesses that were always going out of business. And they have big banners going out of business, and after a month that changes to lost our lease, and then the next month it's going out of business. I could be wrong, I'm just guessing, but I think this kind of restriction is an effort to prevent or discourage that particular form of retail advertising. My sense is that we're at little risk of that particular perceived retail vice at this point in Main Street's evolution. And I'm not sure that given Behringer's location that the same concerns even apply, frankly, although I don't really want to get into modifying the ordinance to contemplate different concerns at different locations. That makes it way too complicated. Knowing that the city will always be free to make additional changes should the need arise, I'm going to propose 6 per year for a maximum of 4 weeks per sign. That is a chunk. That's 24 weeks.
That's half a year.
A little bit less than that.
A little bit less, but not
much. But honestly, if that's something that's driving retail business in any measurable extent at one of our biggest retail venues, I'm open to it, and I don't need to have the last word either.
What about the idea that, I like your suggestion, but what about the idea, since it was expressed here that with some events 10 weeks are needed, with other events only 2 weeks are needed, so it could be worded that you could have you could have a total of 36 weeks or whatever 6 times 4 would be, you said there?
That makes it hard to regulate, though.
Well, they would know then that they could use them all up in one thing. But you have a total number of weeks to do your banner. You have 6 times 4 is 24 weeks of a year, which is a little less than half a year, and that you can use them however you want. But once they're gone, you can't do them anymore. I mean, rather than have 4 weeks for each time, I'm just trying to accommodate what the kind of thing that was expressed here. That you might need a varying.
I've got a couple of problems with that. One, it's an extremely long period of time. If you've got, permission to put up banners of some unspecified size, I haven't heard anybody say anything about size for half the year. Basically, I mean that's without talking about size. Somebody could put up a 500-foot long banner, and Behringer has the frontage to do that. I'm reluctant to say as big as you want for half the year.
Well, no, I didn't mean to imply as big as you want it at all there, but I was just thinking in order not to be too rigid about the time, since different events might need different lengths of time. But
I mean, you will begin to look like Market Street.
Well, so what if it's more up to
fellow commissioners, guys, that's what I was about to say, guys and gals, this is a decision actually above our pay grade. All we can do is make a recommendation to council. I recommend that we keep it as is and that they can hash it out.
You mean don't make that change?
I wouldn't make that change.
Okay. I like that idea.
It's bigger than us, and it's also complex. I mean, there's a complex side to it. I want to move this process along. The city needs to see it. Maybe there's more work that staff can do, specifically about temporary signs. But I'm not a huge fan of temporary signs. On the other hand, they seem to drive business. So I'm, and part of the temporary signs, which I don't really understand, is all of the A-frame signs, right? That's another thing where it's sort of above our pay grade, and I'm not a fan of them. I don't like them, but
I like them.
People like them, and they have them.
I'm going to take issue with the notion that it's above our pay grade.
We get paid so little.
We're going to be. Well, there's that, but setting that aside. And this is coming to us in a format and for a purpose that doesn't require of us a final vote, word per word on the changes, and that's fine. But we're going to be, I'm pretty certain, in other zoning text change matters that come before us, we're going to be charged with making the clearest and best recommendation to the council that we can, and I think we're qualified. We don't get the final word, but I think the more we do to articulate a response and a viewpoint to the council, the more assistance, if you will, the more support we provide for the process that culminates in council action. And with all that said, I think on this particular item, unless Director Hausch indicates otherwise, I'm thinking he may have heard enough at this point to be able to deliver some sense of the Commission's varied response.
My sense is temporary means temporary, and if temporary is half the year, it's not temporary. It should be another category of sign.
Well,
so that's 1 out of 4.
I suppose that's pretty arbitrary.
I would also think that without size limitations is dangerous.
Size, yeah.
We do have Several businesses in town that have lots of frontage. I would hate to see them use that frontage for a very long, very tall, temporary banner.
So you're saying
let
size.
me make a suggestion where maybe we can kind of coalesce. I think we could, for example, recommend to the council that the council consider establishing a maximum size for banners by area. That the council consider increasing the number of times a banner may go up and the total length of time that banners may be displayed on a property somewhere north of the 4 times 2 weeks in the current ordinance, and let the council take it from there. That's clear direction, if not a final detailed proposal.
It also incorporated everyone's thoughts. That was very well done.
Thank you.
I really like that.
These questions have raised, though, the question about the sandwich board signs.
Yeah.
Where, Director Hush, where is that in the?
It's right here.
Where is right here?
It's.
So 17.148.030B, and then, I'm sorry, not B.
It's D, off-premise signs.
And then also E10, portable freestanding signs.
Yep. And 8, non-appurtenant signs.
I'm sorry, this is 030,
Number 10. It's on page 153.
the portable freestanding signs.
Number 10.
So currently, portable freestanding signs
Prohibited.
are prohibited.
Yeah.
Yes, and for good reason. ADA clearance gets to be a real hassle, and
yet we
that
have a
turns
lot
out
of-
to be city responsibility, since the city's taken responsibility for the sidewalks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And this
to me
will
that-
be brought up as a part of the code enforcement discussion that staff
Yes.
will present to the Planning Commission.
To the Planning Commission or the City Council?
Well, Commissioner or Chair Hardy requested a presentation on code enforcement
right,
to the
right.
Planning Commission, and the City Council has prioritized changing the code enforcement process to make it more effective, so staff will bring both.
Well, I would.
Formative presentation with an ordinance change to the Commission in the near term.
Okay,
But
does
I
that
would
mean
like to
everybody has
ask-
to watch out about their illegal fences now?
I would like to ask you to take to the City Council on the portable sign issue and remind them that there are people who are obeying the ordinance who are losing out. And I had complaints a while ago, many years ago, about that. And the people who are just ignoring it are benefiting, and that either the ordinance needs to be changed. If the enforcement is going to be impossible or really because I know Greg Desmond used to say that he'd take his truck and he'd pick up all those signs, like every couple, and then take them to the city yard and put them in the yard, and then the next week new ones would be there, and he did that 2 or 3 times, and then he stopped doing it. But that was the enforcement at the time. So if you could somehow communicate to the City Council that this is being violated so often that maybe we need to take another look at it or look at the enforcement more, because to have it the way it is very unjust and undermines the whole process of.
I don't see a lot of violations anymore. That was a problem a while ago.
Oh, there are a lot.
decade or so, but I don't see as many as I used to see.
I do.
The other thing with signs
Especially
is
south of
any
town.
business owner figures the more signs they have, the bigger the signs are, the more business they're going to get. It's kind of like dealing with the trucking industry. They have 3 things. They want their trucks wider, heavier, and to go faster, right? People who have businesses want signs that are bigger and more of them. And there's never an end to it. So at some point, you have to say, that's enough.
Well, you know what I think might be what I would like to do if I were the Queen? I would have a discussion with business owners who are using those signs and try to get a sense from them how important they feel it is and what would have to, did they know they were violating it? And because I've heard some of them say they really need those signs.
Forgive me, but I'd like to...
Let's move on.
I'd like to bring the discussion
Sorry.
back to what's in front of us.
Is that in front of us? They're prohibited at this point, and people are breaking that prohibition while others are following it, and it's very...
What is your recommendation to the council?
That be specifically brought out, that it not just be on this list, but that aspect of having an ordinance in here that's being routinely and for a long time ignored by some of the population and not by the other, that something needs to be fixed. Either the ordinance can be changed or enforcement needs to happen, but it undermines the
Do you have
credibility.
a preference?
Pardon?
Do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. No, I think they just. Personally, I don't mind those signs at all. I think they're kitschy and fun, and it's part of it's part of the character of St. Helena because they've been here a long time. But most people don't agree with me.
St. Helena will get sued.
Well, I hear what you're saying.
You have to have clear space on the sidewalk by the ADA. It's civil rights legislation.
Well, I understand.
We will get sued and we will lose.
I hear what you're saying. If that's the case, then
Is it enough then simply to flag this as a subject of ongoing code enforcement concerns?
I suppose. Okay. But I see it as bigger than that. It undermines the system to have laws that are constantly broken for some and not others. But the other thing too.
But that's a whole category of things, not limited to this, and something we can come back to when the subject of code enforcement is in front of us.
And I guess with respect to the public safety issues that you're bringing up, a lot of these signs are south of town and have traditionally been south of town, where the traffic is not, the foot traffic is not the same. So there might be a difference in. They might look at a difference in what to have there and what to have downtown on the main couple of blocks of the downtown. So it seems to me, because I know the businesses south of town complain that if you didn't have those signs, no one would know they were there, and they're, So anyway, we're trying to help businesses, but Does that sound unreasonable? Can you fit that in there someplace?
Staff will communicate a general concern regarding the use and enforcement of A-frame signs.
And maybe having more than one definition, more than one rule, depending on where you're located in the town. Because I noticed one of the rules here is it's only could be in an area where it's 25 miles per hour or less. So, it's the cars are going faster there and so forth, yeah.
Have you driven into St. Helena recently? Oh my goodness, the average traffic speed south of town now.
Well, but it's not.
Sorry, I'm sort of making a joke. For those watching at home, that's my sense of humor.
Well, I thought of that the minute I said it. Like, who goes 25 miles an hour?
So staff just wants to circle back regarding the banners. Is there consistent or is there unanimous direction that the council consider increasing the number of times and the length, or just to review the number and times and length? That's one question. And then it sounds like it is unanimous that the council incorporate size limitations and language clarifications into that section of the code.
Well, let's see if we can take this one at a time. Is there anyone who disagrees with the proposition that the council should establish a size limitation and that the language in the ordinance be reconciled so that the active term includes banners? I even made some notes here, actually. If you hold on a second, I've got... I think if you go to what is 17.148.020L, if that is modified to read temporary adverse signs, comma, including banners, comma, or balloons, blah, then that fixes there. So is there any anyone who opposes recommending that the council establish a size limitation and adopt the proposed language in 17.148.02L.
Well, that doesn't address the discrepancy between what a banner needs to be, that a banner needs to be more than 12 inches, or are you suggesting that?
Yeah, it does. It takes care of that, absolutely.
How, without putting what the banner, I mean, it has 12 inches.
Temporary
for the balloon.
advertising signs, comma, including banners, comma, or balloons 12 inches or smaller.
Okay, you don't want to have a reference to any size for the banners at that place? Since
No,
there is
I
one
think that's
for the
unnecessary there. I think the size limit should go in the definition.
balloon. Okay.
Banner means that's where I would do it.
Well, then take out the 12 inches of the balloon there. I don't know.
Well, you could
I'm just-
move.
People are going to look and say 12 inches. Yeah.
I think staff can figure that out, frankly, how to deal with that.
Okay.
I don't think we need to be perfect in order to get the job done at this moment.
We do. We have to be perfect.
No, we don't. So, I think we have an accord on that point. Then the next question is whether we're in accord with recommending that the council look at an increase to the number of banners and the length of time that banners can be used.
Within reason.
We're leaving it to their discretion how much, just recommending that they look at or consider an increase.
Yeah, I consider a modest increase. I mean, that'd be my adjective, or, adverb.
I would suggest just consider
That's all
the length of time allowed, not consider an increase.
Okay. We don't have a
real consensus on this.
No problem.
accord on that one.
No. The other thing I'd suggest you might want to take a look at, being so much of the roadway, the highway is in town, is either 35 or 45. I would suggest you might want to look at any Caltrans standards on that. We have two 45-mile-an-hour sections in town. No,
North,
north and south.
before you get to Krug.
North and south. We have two 45-mile-an-hour sections. You can't drive that fast.
Bobby can't walk that fast. That's the thing.
That's right.
So, are we ready for an action? I'd love to hear a motion.
So moved. I move that we, what do we, that we, well, how do you put this?
Recommend approval of the changes as discussed. I
Oh,
think
okay, as
covers it.
discussed and modified, okay.
Is there a second? I'll second that. Ms. Gamero, would you call the vote, please?
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
I will vote yes.
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Agenda item 5.3, review and recommendation to the City Council of an ordinance amending and restating Helena Municipal Code, Chapter 17.164, Design Review, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Chair Hardy, Commission,
Would you
and
present, please?
folks
Commission.
watching at home. We're waiting on a PowerPoint. However, as identified, the item before you is a review and recommendation of an ordinance revising the design review procedures and processes for residential projects, certain residential projects, the outdoor seating requirements, and the installation of awnings and canopies. So, as I just identified, the ordinance proposes to make changes to those three areas. And one thing that wasn't well characterized in the staff report, that these changes, they were directed by the city council, majority of them. However, they said this is a trial period, so that was not well discussed in the staff report. So just for a period of 1 or 2 years.
Are we going to put up a banner for that?
That's right. Exactly.
So what about residential signs and banners? Absolutely.
So just for some background, on October 4th of last year, the council adopted their 3-year goals, and it included one for enhanced organizational performance. And under this was direction to draft and present citywide design guidelines, as well as provide recommended improvements to the design review process. I am going to take a moment here and plug the design guideline workshop scheduled for August 29th at Carnegie. There's 2 sessions at 2 p.m. and at 4:30 p.m. I invite all the members of the public, decision makers, to come down. You can show up at any time during those time periods. It's a workshop proposal. You can just show up, and we're going to have multiple stations where you can participate, and we're looking for input on the future design of development in St. Helena. 10 to 12, and then 4:30 to 6:30. So separately, as they reviewed the budget on May 9th of this year, the council provided direction to more efficiently utilize staff resources, and as a part of this, they included reducing the types of single-family residential projects that require planning commission approval specific to design review. So staff took this direction as proposing to modify Municipal Code 17164, which is what applies to design review. And as it currently reads, it says any new building or structure or for exterior addition to, alteration of, or modification of any existing structure or building as regulated in each zoning district. So it essentially says any change to a building or a new building requires design review approval from the Planning Commission. The proposed ordinance before you eliminates the need for commission approval for accessory structures and for alterations and modifications to existing homes through a administrative design review process. So the Planning Commission will recall certain instances where maybe roof materials is changing, doors and windows are changing, siding is changing. However, nothing is really changing with regards to the footprint of the building, and the Commission has several times said almost, why is this before us? It's because of the current language of the code, and we are trying to clarify that. Similarly, on the item earlier tonight on the consent agenda was a trellis in the rear yard that met all setbacks and height limitations, etc. Technically, that requires design review, so we use the exemption process. It still requires a significant amount of staff resources in order to get that before the commission, and so part of the direction from the council was to streamline that for a limited period of time as a trial, both to allow staff to focus on some of the larger policy priorities that the council and the commission have requested us to work on, and also to more efficiently use our resources that we do have. It's important to note that this will not apply to any structures that are designated as historic. So anything that is will be brought before the commission for a design review with regards to those changes. In looking at what process or what other things in the code requires design review, staff identified that outdoor seating requires design review. And so we are seeking input on making changes to the current requirements for outdoor seating to obtain design review approval. It's often seen as an amenity in commercial districts. There are very prescriptive requirements identified in the code currently, including alcohol beverage control permit and approvals, health department permit and approvals, encroachment permit and insurance requirements and approvals, maintenance of ADA circulation, does not allow any expansion of restaurant seats, and it's revocable. So given all of those prescriptive standards, staff feels that allowing a administrative sidewalk permit to a sidewalk dining permit, which is already referenced in the code but does not have any specifics, could be utilized to approve outdoor seating for existing businesses in the service commercial and central business district without going through design review process, which is expensive and time consuming. Similarly, in looking at the code, the design review is currently required for awnings, canopies, and marquees, but there are also height and maintenance requirements for awnings and canopies and marquees and a building permit. So staff is proposing to utilize the administrative design review process, which would be created for the review of the residential changes, to allow changes to awnings and canopies. Obviously, a marquee is an integrated element of a structure, so we are not proposing to do that administratively. But staff feels that this would both facilitate kind of, changes of color, those types of things, but also support maintenance. So a lot of times folks don't want to expend the money on replacing a canopy or an awning because it costs the same amount of money to ask the question of if they can do it as it would to just make the change. And so staff is recommending that that be done administratively with the goal to both streamline the design review process, take less projects before the commission that are relatively straightforward and have some prescriptive standards, but also to encourage maintenance and replacement of those materials to keep the buildings looking fresher. So you'll see in the staff report, there's a few other minor changes to the code language, including making some changes to the criteria for design review. It's primarily just intended to eliminate redundancy. There's a couple of the criteria that are almost explicitly repeated, and there's others that are repeated but just in almost different wording. So staff is proposing to make some changes to that. There's analysis in the staff report identifying that the changes would be exempt from CEQA under several categorical exemptions, the general rule, and also some of these changes are consistent with direction in the general plan and zoning code. Further, staff finds the proposals in keeping with a number of general plan policies which are identified in the staff report and further discussed. And then for the process, it's similar to the sign report or sign changes we just looked at. Planning Commission reviews these, makes a recommendation to the City Council. City Council has ultimate approval. And just to remind the Commission that they did give us a September 30th deadline for trying to get these changes before them. So if we move on tonight, then we will be able to meet that deadline. Given that, it's recommended by the Planning Community Improvement Department that the Planning Commission find that the proposed changes are exempt from the requirements of CEQA as identified in the staff report and the attached resolution and ordinance, and review and recommend the proposed changes to the design review process to the City Council. I'm available for any questions and look forward to your comments.
I have a question. You mentioned the trellis earlier. That's not an awning or seating. Is it?
No, that's correct. So that's one of the residential accessory structures that are identified in the initial changes that are proposed to go through an administrative design review, still ensuring it meets all setback, height, lot coverage, floor area ratio limitations, but not requiring Planning Commission approval.
So I have a question. Given that you want these to be ministerial now, that means nobody gets notified, right?
That is correct. It's worth noting that there is a provision in the code that allows the planning director to elevate any of these administrative decisions to the Planning Commission should the director find that there's a need.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking the only one that I had is any. Well, I do have even the outdoor seating. Are the other businesses around the applicant for that they won't be notified about this desire to have outdoor seating? Neighbors won't be notified if there's going to be a canopy that, especially if it's a short-term rental place or whatever. Neighbors won't be able to weigh in on whether it's going to be. Because I didn't agree with what you said on page 168 of 188. That the structures, that the function, it goes with the property, but not with the structure. And I don't think I don't agree. I think the structures are many times built specifically for a particular function to have happen under them, or that wasn't happening before. And so I guess I'm rambling kind of, but I guess my question is there any way to make sure that on some of these things that neighbors are notified, so that I know that's the time that you're trying to save, but so that if there is a concern from a surrounding business, or that they would have a chance to have a hearing, rather than all of a sudden you approve it and then all of a sudden they start, building the thing, and the neighbors have not had a chance to say anything.
So just to clarify, accessory structures for commercial properties would still require planning commission approval. So the accessory structure element is only for residential accessory structures.
Right.
And the direction from the city council was to reduce the number of projects that are brought before the commission, specifically identifying residential accessory structures in their direction.
Okay, well, I don't, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I'll put it that way. And also, and I'm assuming the seating, the outdoor seating too, I'm a little uncomfortable with that, because it's much harder to deal with people who are complaining after something has been constructed.
Yeah, so the idea that with outdoor seating, it's revocable if it becomes a problem. But the idea is that if there's an existing business, they're not expanding their number of seats, and they would like to put some seating outdoors for their patrons, that would be issued through a sidewalk permit, subject to all of the ministerial and prescriptive requirements that are already in place.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm not comfortable with that.
And then what would the basis for revocation be, should it come up? If you have outdoor seating that's been approved ministerially because it meets all of the standards, what would a basis for revocation be?
Well, it's a good question. No, definitely not a complaint, because a complaint doesn't equal a violation of any code, so it's important to identify that. I would say probably along the lines of the nuisance type situations that are in the code enforcement language now, the property maintenance code issues. I'm trying to find the revocation language in the code. Yeah, folks going beyond the area that they are allowed to have their outdoor seating.
Well, violations of the permit, yeah.
And they're not allowed to have any entertainment. So essentially, it's allowing some elements of the business to function outside. But again, if the commission's not supportive of this change, that's the direction staff will take to the council. It's just generally communities historically heavily regulated outdoor seating. If you look at zoning codes, they often require a use permit or some type of discretionary mechanism historically, and then more contemporarily, they've realized that these are amenities to their community to allow people to sit outside, to provide eyes on the street, to provide more indication of business activity occurring, to provide more the patrons to have more options for how they enjoy the business. And so that's the direction a lot of cities are going, is to allow these things because they're seen as amenities versus impacts.
Well, I'm wondering, because I'm remembering part of the short-term rental ordinance had that the person who was applying needed to contact the adjacent neighbors, the neighbor across the street, to the side and to the back. That, at least that was in the first draft of the ordinance. I don't know if it's still there. And I'm wondering if you could put it on the applicant to in order to get the ministerial approval, they need to talk to adjacent businesses and or neighbors, adjacent neighbors. It was very well defined. It wasn't, they didn't have to go out 300 feet or anything. And if anyone had a complaint, then it would be heard. Because one business might not want the outdoor seating next.
Here's the thing, Bobby. If it's a ministerial approval, then what that means is it must be approved if it meets the standards. So if you create a notice process to encourage people to complain, then if it's truly a ministerial approval, their complaints will 99.9% of the time make no difference. And I'm wondering if that doesn't actually increase the level of frustration rather than decrease it.
I hear your point. Okay.
I'm thinking what we've got here is actually a hybrid model, because it allows, rather than requires, the planning director to make a decision. It allows him to bump up something if he or she believes it is of area-wide or maybe even individual concern, based on their own beliefs on the concern level of a particular project. The planning director is allowed to bump it up to the commission. So I suggest this is not not a fully ministerial process. And I would also like to suggest that not only the process allow for the planning director to push something up, but allow some mechanism, and I don't know how to construct this, allow the planning commission to reach down, if you will, and grab something the planning commission believes is of concern.
You mean if you got a complaint from someone in the public or something like that?
Something not a
otherwise you
complaint
wouldn't
about
hear
a
about
completed project, but
No.
a concern about, gee, there's way too many of these things, and I'm concerned about this next one right here.
Cumulative effects.
Well, simply bringing it to the planning commission doesn't make it discretionary. It suggests discretion
Really?
because that's what we're used to. But planning commissions can, and including St. Helena Planning Commission, sometimes find that they're presented with decisions that are ministerial in nature. There was once a rather sharp conflict between commissioners and the city attorney over the rather limited extent of their discretion with respect to a controversial lot line adjustment. That's the one that comes immediately to mind. So, so from my perspective, it's important for us to understand both what the intent and the language of the ordinance is. And if it isn't clear in the ordinance, then I think it should be clear as to whether the rules of the road in effect change based on the election of the planning director to send an application to the commission. Or if, is that really just an opportunity for people to vent and to learn why or how it is that a particular application in this category warrants ministerial approval, or and if not, if the purpose of providing the director with the discretion to elevate it to the planning commission is to convert the ministerial approval to a discretionary approval, what does that mean? Does that mean even if it meets all the standards, we can deny it? I think we need to be clear about that.
As proposed, it's an administrative approval to allow outdoor dining. That's proposed by staff. If the commission's not comfortable with that, that's not what needs to be the case.
Well,
My concern isn't just over the dining; it's just over the entire. And I think Lister's concern is also over the entire process. You're converting several things to ministerial decision making, not just outdoor dining.
Well, let me be clear with everyone present. I don't have an objection to making some things that are presently ministerial, and I mean discretionary into ministerial decisions. I think that's probably a good thing, so long as the categories of application or permit that we choose for that status are well chosen. I'm not at all sure what the workload for staff or the commission will be like 5 or 10 years from now, but I'm really sure that in the next couple of years we will all be well served, and I mean the community as well, if staff's attention and the commission's attention, if our resources, our human resources in this planning enterprise are prioritized effectively. And I think, in that light, bumping some things down in terms of, the discretionary versus ministerial approval process is smart. My concern is with being very clear with what it is we're doing, and clear in terms of our discussion and what we communicate to staff for purposes of the recommendation, but also making sure that the ordinance is clear so that we don't run into a whole lot of confusion.
Like you, I'd be very happy to no longer see an application where somebody's going to change the outside of their house from stucco to wood or wood to stucco, and that having to come in front of us for review. I think I agree. It's not the best use of your time. It's not the best use of our time. It's not yet best use of city resources. I would certainly love to see some of these disappear.
So just to clarify, the council directed the changes to existing structures, minor additions, and the construction of accessory structures to become ministerial. So that's council directed. So the ordinance doing that is before you for review and comment.
I guess, Mike, if you could articulate to them that, I mean, just because of what we had here tonight, in order to avoid the kind of, conflict that can happen when people aren't notified when changes that we might not think are significant to your neighbor do seem privacy issues and other things too, like for a canopy, what could go wrong. But I can imagine things. I don't know if there's some way to build into that a caution about what the people who are the impacts of the change, because there are impacts. I mean, essentially, what you're saying, they're not. The impacts are so trivial that they don't need to be, heard. That the public doesn't need to be informed. So I don't know how to word that, but my concern is that people are going to feel like, that things are happening. They had no idea they were going to happen, and they do feel negatively impacted.
Director Hausch, can I have a clarification of what a minor modification or addition to a current residential structure is defined as?
There is no definition, so it's going to be a subjective call by the planning staff. So if you read the ordinance that was before you, it attempts to try to calculate that, and then it also attempts to give staff the ability to calculate when something is past that threshold and needs to be elevated to the planning commission. But again, the direction was to reduce the number of minor or low-level design review applications coming to the commission to free up staff resources to focus on the larger priority projects.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where you draw that line, if you're trying to draw that line in code.
Sure. So what staff's looking at, the trellis that was here that met all height and setback requirements and was located in the rear yard, that would not be a design review exemption. That would be a building permit. An addition, small addition to the rear of a home, small 500 square feet or less, staff would likely recommend that stay as a ministerial building permit review, as long as it meets all development standards, floor area ratio, all those things. An addition to the front of a home that maybe modified the entrance or the how close it is to a neighbor, that's probably something that staff would say, this needs to be reviewed by the planning commission. But there's going to be instances where staff approves one and you all hear about it and it's unfortunate. But we have to make a judgment call. And again, I guess the point being, this is a temporary situation. If there are instances where it is problematic, we can revisit it. The entire code can not be reauthorized in the 1 or 2 year period that it was allowed to occur. We're kind of experiencing a pig in the python situation with the amount of policy work that we have. We're trying to get through that.
A python?
And so...
pig in a python, it takes so much effort to swallow.
We're trying to just free up some resources in order to move it forward.
That's kind of why I'm suggesting that there be some process, and I don't know how to make this work, that we could reach down.
Sure.
I mean, when you said 500 square foot addition, I kind of blanched a little because we've got some 600 square foot size houses in town. If I was adding 500 square feet to a 600 square foot house, that's a pretty major change.
So, and I think that's something I think we can make a concrete recommendation, and I'd like to propose one. I think it is much better to define the threshold between a minor mod that qualifies for administrative design review and a major modification in terms of percentage of square footage, habitable space. I'm winging it a little bit here, but I would capture it in square footage, not in percentage.
Percentage, yeah. Square
Not in
footage
a
would be
hard
tough.
number, so that we address John's concern. I was going to propose it anyway, but John's really given me the perfect illustration of the problem.
And if there's no square footage change, so if it's simply a roof line change or a replacement of windows or a replacement of stucco with the prior example, stucco versus clapboard siding, sure, absolutely. Yeah. We don't need to see that. But I'd really limit that size. I mean, I'd put it at 5%. Sure.
Well, I'm heartened by the fact that that it's not written in stone. This is kind of like we're going to try this out, see how it works. I'm game for that.
Let me propose then that we recommend to the council that they adopt a maximum change in floor area tied to a percentage of increase. I don't think we're going to be able to necessarily reach an agreement on what that percentage should be, unless, if you all want to give that a go,
what were you
I'm
thinking?
open.
What were you thinking?
Oh, I wouldn't make it any less than 10%. I think 10% is probably a realistic threshold.
Just as an example, 5% of 1,000 square feet is a 50 square foot addition.
So 10% would be 100
square feet.
So you're saying you could do 10% without minutes area. That seems small, but
well, it does.
Yeah.
But we're now looking at a lot of homes at 2,000 to 3,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So there we're at 200 to 300. You have to kind of scale it up and think about it.
The average house in California now is like 2,400 square feet. So.
I wouldn't personally be comfortable with any number bigger than 20, but. I'm happy if the council gets direction and acts on direction to set a limit by percentage of existing floor area. I think that's a meaningful recommendation.
And for example, Chairman Hardy, Chairperson Hardy, some of the things that we've looked at before that we probably didn't need to is when someone is filling in a gap in a wall, right? So it's sort of a 200 square foot addition because it was originally a porch and then now it's no longer a porch.
We
things
had
like
one
that.
a few weeks ago. I think it was 120 square feet.
Yeah, so those things are lovely and tiny. The things where people are putting additional bedrooms in the back of their house, that strikes me as, I think the town would like us to see those things.
Well, I think impact is the operative word. If it's a house that's out and nobody's around, and who cares? But I think the impact on that needs to be looked at, and if the impact seems significant enough, it should be. No?
Yeah,
that's subjective. I know.
Well, I think it should apply blanket. Seen, unseen, whatever the percentage figures in is, that just is what it is. The more difficult thing, perhaps in my mind, is how to separate some of these exterior changes that may or may not be perceived as very large. There was a house on Spring Street. You remember the one now that's all stuccoed with the stucco wall? That started off as a little farmhouse sort of thing, and it got changed, and it got changed, and it got changed. That kind of change should come to the Planning Commission. The one that used to be owned by the art dealer.
Oh, it's right behind me. I know exactly the house.
Yeah,
that was a historic home.
Yeah, that was a historic home, but it got changed pretty massively. So if somebody's suggesting a change like this, that needs to come here. But that was wood to stucco. So I don't know how to draw that
Well,
So the
one would
designation-
make an exemption for changes to historic structures. I think that's already in here.
That is
So
in
I
there.
don't think that one would happen again under this ordinance. I
Or
don't
any
think they
ordinance,
could.
I would hope, but that's an example of the kind of thing that can go awry.
And I'm going to make another specific proposal. I'd like to recommend to the council that the changes be adopted for a 2-year period. I'm not sure what to think about what happens at the end of 2 years. One really has to choose between automatic expiration or automatic extension.
Well, I think one would have enough data at that time to say, this and this and this is okay. This and this and this may not be okay. So at that point, we
Yeah,
may have
but-
the ability to
but-
draw
but-
a finer line than we're trying to draw
But the
tonight.
ordinance should, if it's for a finite term, be clear as to whether inaction by the council terminates the ordinance or extends it.
Because it was explicitly directed as temporary, staff's plan was that it would automatically expire
Terminate.
without
Okay, fine.
specific.
Great.
Then I'm happy to go with that.
Great.
So
I'm
just to summarize some of the other direction,
Yes.
just to try to get consistent or see if everyone's on the same page. 2-year time period. Changes to existing homes that are material door-to-window changes seem to be generally supported by the commission, although there is some concern. Obviously, no historic districts. Again, there may be one that staff approves that becomes a concern for folks that you all know or live next to, or you may live next to the house itself. That's just part of this deal, so just so you're aware of that. And then specifically create a percentage limit for additions to draw the line, with it not being higher than 20%.
Somewhere between 5 and 20%.
A couple of things in that percentage change. I don't know what anybody else thinks about this, but no changes in roof height in that percentage change.
I like that.
So we don't have somebody popping up, 200 or 300 square feet of room on top of their house.
Or
So
just raising the ceiling.
let me tease this out a little bit, because we have had some
because
situations.
I'm talking about how it looks.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we have had some situations where an entire roof change was proposed, brought before the commission, and it maybe increased slightly, a foot or two, not noticeable. But what I think is you can't add a second story where one doesn't exist.
No living space. And yeah.
And
A couple of details. 187 of 188. D1 and D2. Are those two sections, a 1.5-foot recovery zone and a 4-foot clear path for ADA, are those concurrent or contiguous?
They are concurrent, so they overlap.
Overlap.
They're separate requirements.
Okay, so you could have your 1.5-foot recovery zone inside the 4-foot ADA space. Okay.
As staff reads it.
I'm wondering if that follows what the ADA standards call for.
So the direction on this could be clarify this for ADA compliance.
Yeah, especially since it's going from edge of curb. When you talk about sidewalk, it's usually inside edge of curb. This is generally read when you say edge of curb. That generally means outside edge of curb.
That's correct.
I'm now going to just interject a personal observation of the recent extensive ADA-related changes to our sidewalks. We're now going to see greatly expanded flooded areas along the pedestrian path of travel each and every winter. I'm assuming, because it's clear that all of these things were very carefully designed that that was found unavoidable, but it is unfortunate that the net result will be an impediment to all pedestrian traffic when our storm drains back up. And it's not at every curb cut that's installed, but I'm walking every day now down Tainer Street to a spot where the curb cut for the ADA access goes right to the storm drain. And part of the construction involved constructing a new curb around the property owner's tree and yard, and you can see, in effect, that the curb behind the sidewalk has functionally replaced the curb that used to protect the sidewalk from the storm drain. I'm sure that's not the only place that's occurred, but that's just an aside.
As long as it impedes everyone equally.
Well, this also is beyond our purview, but Chairperson Hardy, dumping a ADA compliant ramp into a storm drain is also, things get stuck in storm drains.
Yeah.
That would seem to be a real surprise.
I just wonder if you guys are comfortable, or if you would think of doing it, to put somewhere in there that you will be mindful of the impacts on neighbors and surrounding businesses when changes are. I mean, can you put some language that acknowledges that there will be some, for cumulative effects and that sort of thing? You don't have to specify that way, but that but that you'll be mindful of impacts on surrounding, not just the setbacks, not just the.
To try to accommodate Bobby's concern, I think it's a valid one. Would it be possible to push down notification to the applicant?
That's what
Somebody comes in and applies for something small.
That's what I suggested.
They're putting up an arbor in their backyard.
That's just it.
Would it be possible to say, as part of the application, you need to notify everybody within that, I don't know, that has a contiguous fence with you or something?
So I'll just reflecting back to the budget hearing where this direction was provided from the council, this question was asked about, well, would you still notify folks that
I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the applicant.
Sure, but just notification in general. So it's kind of a philosophy question of, okay, is it more helpful to know that something's going to happen and you can't do anything about it? Is that more helpful or frustrating than just your neighbor building the trellis and you talking to them about it? The example I used is the city of San Francisco in responding to the Housing Accountability Act changes, whereby cities must provide a prescriptive list of development standards for certain projects that are now ministerial residential projects. You'll be seeing one of those lists coming in the probably medium term. Elected not to notify residents when these projects are ministerially approved because of the level of frustration it creates amongst folks to get a notice from the city that tells them this is happening and you can do nothing about it.
Yeah, but are you saying that
I'm thinking they wouldn't be getting it from the city. Mm-hmm. They'd be getting it from the neighbor because that's the requirement.
Sure.
Right? And B, since we do have, or what is suggested here allows you to push something up.
Exactly. I mean, if you had
based on your own consideration, that if every neighbor in the neighborhood goes booga booga, that could be a consideration.
Exactly.
So you would have some outlet for that frustration. There would be an action that could be taken.
But I thought, Lester, when I suggested that
now we'd still fall under the same set of rules, whatever the dickens they happen to be.
So this is prior to submitting a building permit, you must notify your neighbors?
I thought Lester said, I suggested that in the beginning of this discussion.
As part of.
And you said, didn't you, Lester, that if then it would no longer be a ministerial event if that were part of the requirement, or there was something that didn't fit for you?
What I said is one has to be clear in thinking about this whether the elevating the application to the Planning Commission changes the standards for approval. If it doesn't change the standards for approval, it's still ministerial, and you've created a forum for the neighbors, but little or no opportunity to satisfy their concerns.
But I don't understand that, because to my mind, if all you needed to check were the setbacks and the height limits, we wouldn't have to be here. Things are brought to us that may be controversial because of how the impacts on the rest of the town. So anything, it seems to me, like if 20 neighbors came to you on one of these ministerial and says, we don't want this, we want an opportunity to speak on record, wouldn't that be reason to bring it to the planning commission?
The issue is
that's a different question, though. I mean, the question, the critical question is, what are the standards that the commission must apply?
The issue is you can't condition a building permit. If it's a building permit process and it meets A, B, and C requirements of the building code, the city has no authority to add conditions to that.
Well, there are other examples of ministerial permits, and there are some that are treated differently in different jurisdictions. Many jurisdictions issue ministerial demolition permits in some cases, for all buildings.
Well, why do you bring things to us? Why do you bring?
Because the code
because
says
the ordinance
everything
says.
comes to the planning commission.
Right. Okay.
It's a question of how the ordinance is written, right?
Right. So if we're going to start parsing what things come or not, it seems to me that the purpose of the Planning Commission is to deal with discretionary issues. And if something that looks purely ministerial on the surface becomes something that's discretionary because of how it's going to fit in with the neighborhood.
No, but that's the issue.
Okay.
You can't. Neighborhood compatibility is not a determination for ministerial versus discretionary.
All right.
The criteria for design review are what is reviewed through a design review process.
Allow me to come back
Okay, I'll stop.
to my point, because I don't think I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. I think the critical thing to focus on is what standards the commission is applying. Okay? If the standards are the same, regardless of whether it gets approval by the planning director or approval by the commission, then absent some evidence presented by members of the public that there's something misleading in the application and that the application does not, in fact, meet the standards set out in the code, the end result is the same.
Where do
If it meets
findings
this-
fit in? Are findings part of this? Not, huh?
Well, sure. I mean, either one finds that it meets the standards
Okay,
or
so
it
the
doesn't.
findings are part of the standards that are to be met.
And an example of this that's I'm familiar with, so I'll use it, is the way in which lot line adjustments are processed by Napa County. Okay, they receive preliminary approval from staff. Notice goes out to the neighbors. Neighbors have the opportunity to appeal the preliminary decision to the Board of Supervisors, but the same standards apply. It's still a ministerial approval, and unless the neighbors can demonstrate that the application violates the standards set out in the code, the appeal is futile. And I'm fine with having it purely ministerial, and I'm fine with giving the planning director the opportunity to say, oh my God, there's so much turmoil about this. I'm going to kick it upstairs to the commission. I just want to be sure that everyone understands whether or not that has changed the level of discretion. I'm thinking that the intent here is that it would not, but that isn't clearly stated, and if we're not sure and you're not sure, Director House, then the council needs to decide.
So the direction that staff is hearing is that there's concerns over potential impacts to neighboring residents and potentially business owners or operators with these changes. and that the process by which these applications are elevated needs to be clearly defined, and staff actually was considering if it basically elevating it to the commission, it becomes it becomes discretionary. It is a design review application that they file that goes to the commission under the same criteria for design review, all those things.
And that's where it's real important that we're able to draw the line of where that is.
Well, if Planning Director House gets broad discretion, then there is no clear line.
And the problem with that is in 2 years, then this fails. Because the public goes, gaga, this doesn't work. So that's one reason I keep going back to, we need a way to reach down.
Yeah, I'm not in support of that myself. I think the planning director inevitably is well aware of what's controversial and problematic. Most often the planning director hears about it first, not always, but I think that's generally the case.
I mean, something to be aware of is any staff level approval has our individual names on it. So just we are cautious,
and administrative approvals are subject to appeal under the code. Are
absolutely,
they not?
Absolutely. All these would be appealable.
And so, at the end of the day,
Costs a lot of money.
reminding myself of that fact, I would be fine just leaving it at that. They're appealable decisions, and so I think the council might want to consider something like the county's process. It's an administrative decision. It's subject to appeal. You give the neighbors notice of their opportunity to appeal, but you don't convert it from ministerial to discretionary in the process. That's my own preference.
I have no problem with that, except that I think that there needs to be a sliding scale for the cost of an appeal, because it essentially people don't have money, cannot afford an appeal, and if part of feeling good about this is that yes, you can appeal, that's been brought up before. This is not the first time.
It's very common for cities to subsidize. We actually subsidize the appeal process now.
Oh, so maybe that could.
I'm saying the $1,000 fee is very much subsidized for the amount of time an appeal takes. I mean, they are intentionally subsidized to try to level the playing field, so to speak. But that direction is
okay.
Is noted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Given what our discussion, are we able to now, have we given the direction that we've said, on top of this, do we need to have a motion?
There's a resolution to approve.
Okay.
Well, I have one more specific item to bring up. 17.164.050
Page is it?
E. This is page 181. Demolition. No permit authorizing the demolition of any building shall be issued until approved by the Planning Commission. We're now looking at ministerial approvals of accessory structures. I think this needs to be qualified. My inclination is to propose that accessory structures not designated historical be exempt from Planning Commission review for purposes of a demolition permit. But I haven't gone back to look at the ordinance definition of accessory structure. Is a garage an accessory structure?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we want a size limit for the exemption. But what doesn't make any sense to me is requiring planning commission approval to demolish a backyard shed.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm 200 square feet, something.
Sure.
Not a building, 100 square feet or less.
Right.
So those are
200 seems about right.
It's basically a one-car garage.
Yeah, that seems about right.
And obviously, historic buildings and likely agricultural structures would. There's a lot of interest in preserving the historic barns and the small agricultural stone structures, those types of things. Even if they're not designated historic, staff would likely recommend that those require discretionary demolition. However, the accessory structures, you're referencing sheds, garages, trellises, those types of things.
Something along those
Sure.
lines should be recommended. And that's my only additional comment. I promise.
Thank you.
Okay, again.
Move it.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the ascension of these ministerial decision-making processes to council with the changes and discussion that we've had tonight.
I apologize for the interruption, but for procedural purposes, may I suggest you open up public comments, although we may not have any, and close that as well?
Very good idea.
open it with one dash, close it with another.
Public hearing is open. There's no one here. Public hearing's closed. And I would observe, Commissioner Knudsen, that the first motion should be a determination that the proposed text amendments are exempt from CEQA.
Oh, yeah.
Probably that's best as two motions.
Okay, let's do motion one, which is that the proposed changes are exempt from CEQA.
I'll second that.
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette.
Yes.
Now I'd like to revive my initial motion to approve these,
I wouldn't be there.
whatever I said.
Staff.
To
It's the
approve these recommendations to the code
Yes.
regarding design review and ministerial approval with conditioned with the discussion that we collectively had this evening with the director.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chair Hardy.
Yes. Are we done? Adjourned.